In a quiet village lived a man named Chike, a proud father whose world revolved around his reputation. His daughter Adaise was his joy, but one secret turned their lives upside down. When Chike discovered that Adaise was carrying a child out of wedlock, his pride burned hotter than his love, and he cast her out of his home. Heartbroken and alone, Adaise wandered into an uncertain future, holding on to her unborn child as her only comfort. Yet, life has a way of turning pain into strength. 3 years later, she returned, not as the broken girl who left, but as a woman who carried with her a shocking truth that would shake her father to his core. Stay with us through each chapter of this powerful journey. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. Chike was a man whose life was shaped by tradition, respect, and a strong sense of authority. In his community, he was known as a man of principle, someone who valued his reputation above all else. People often sought his counsel, admired his discipline, and looked to him as a model of how a father should guide his household. At the center of his life was Adaise, his only daughter, the light in his home since the day she was born. He dreamed of her future, often imagining her walking into his compound one day with a husband of good character, starting her own family with the blessings of her father and her people. To Chike, nothing was more important than maintaining dignity and order, for he believed that honor was what gave a man his true worth. But as Adaise grew older, she began to carry her own dreams, ones that didn't always fit neatly into the path her father had imagined. She was bright and full of warmth, with a gentle nature that made people gravitate toward her. Chike often admired her kindness, though he sometimes worried it made her too trusting of others. For him, discipline and caution were virtues that kept one safe. But Adaise's open heart saw the world differently. She believed in giving people chances, in listening more than judging, and in following her own hopes, rather than being bound only by expectation. Chike loved his daughter deeply, but he never knew that within her heart was a secret that would test his love, his pride, and everything he claimed to stand for. For months, Adaise had carried the weight of something she couldn't hide forever. She tried to mask it with a smile, tried to bury her fear in everyday chores, but truth has a way of revealing itself. And when it did, it was not in whispers or half words. It was written on her face, in the quiet way her body changed, in the heavy silence she carried around her. When Chike finally saw what he had long ignored, his world shook. The man who had lived his life by honor suddenly felt that same honor slipping from his grasp. He had raised his daughter with strict values. Yet here she was, standing before him with the one thing he could not reconcile: pregnant, unmarried, and afraid. The moment of truth came on a hot afternoon when Adaise could no longer keep her secret hidden. She had rehearsed the words over and over, trying to imagine how her father might react, but nothing prepared her for the storm that followed. With trembling hands, she approached Chike, her eyes lowered, her voice quiet but steady as she confessed the truth. She told him she was with child, and though she prayed for understanding, what met her instead was rage, born out of wounded pride. Chike's face hardened, and for a moment, he was silent, as if her words were too heavy to reach his ears. Then his voice, usually calm and measured, thundered with disbelief. To him, this was not just a mistake, it was a disgrace, a stain on the family name that would echo through the village. Neighbors would whisper, friends would judge, and his honor, carefully built over years, would crumble in a matter of days. He could not imagine how to walk through the marketplace, how to sit among the elders, how to face those who once respected him. In his heart, the disappointment cut deeper than any wound, and pride pushed away the love he once held as a father. Adaise tried to explain, her tears flowing freely, her words pleading for him to see beyond the shame and remember that she was still his daughter. She spoke of her fear, of her loneliness, of the hope that he would protect her even now. But her father's ears were closed, sealed by the weight of judgment. Chaik's anger grew until his decision was final. She could no longer remain in his house. He told her to leave, to bear her shame away from his compound, for he would not allow his name to be tarnished. The words fell like heavy stones upon Adeise's heart. She could scarcely believe that the man who once held her as a baby, who promised to keep her safe, was now turning her away when she needed him most. Yet, even in that moment of rejection, she understood that pride had blinded him. Though her body trembled and her spirit cracked, she accepted his judgment in silence. With tears staining her cheeks, she gathered what little she could carry and walked out of the only home she had ever known, stepping into a world that suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. Behind her, the gate closed with finality, and before her lay the unknown path of survival, with only her unborn child to accompany her. The night Adais left her father's compound, the moon cast a pale glow on the dusty road ahead of her. She walked without knowing where her feet were taking her, clutching a small bundle of clothes, her tears mixing with the sweat of exhaustion. Every step away from home felt heavier than the last, for behind her was not just a house but the memories of a childhood filled with laughter, the familiar warmth of family meals, and the protective arms of the father who had now turned her away. The silence of the night pressed down on her, broken only by the distant croak of frogs and the echo of her own sobs. She had always believed home would be the one place where she was safe, but now that belief lay shattered, leaving her with nothing but loneliness. Days passed, and Adais soon learned how unforgiving the world could be for a young woman carrying the weight of shame. She wandered from one small village to another, searching for a place where she might rest, but doors closed at the sound of her story. Some looked at her with pity, but pity was not enough to offer her shelter. Others whispered behind her back, their eyes sharp with judgment. She felt like an outcast, marked by her father's rejection and condemned by the same society that once celebrated her innocence. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, her feet blistered from endless walking, and at night she curled up under trees, praying for morning to come quickly. But the pain of rejection was not only physical. It lived deep in her heart, in the hollow ache of missing her father's voice, in the unbearable thought that he might never forgive her. She replayed their last conversation over and over, hoping to find a different ending, but all she heard were his harsh words ringing in her ears. She carried the burden of guilt, believing that perhaps she had failed him, yet at the same time, she longed for him to see her as more than her mistake. As her hands rested protectively on her belly, she whispered to the life growing inside her, promising that the child would never feel the abandonment she herself had endured. In those lonely nights, Adais discovered a quiet strength within her. Though her heart was broken, she refused to let despair swallow her whole. Each dawn reminded her that life was still moving forward, and so must she. The pain of rejection was sharp, but it became the fire that pushed her to keep walking, to keep searching, to believe that somewhere, somehow, a door would open for her again. One weary evening, as Adais dragged herself along a narrow path leading into yet another village, her legs could carry her no further. She sank to the ground beneath a mango tree, her face pale with hunger, her breath shallow from exhaustion. It was there that a woman named Mama Ifeoma found her. Known in her community for her generosity, Mama Ifeoma was returning from the market when she spotted Adais slumped against the tree, her bundle beside her eyes closed in weakness. Without hesitation, she set down her basket and bent over, gently shaking the young woman awake. When Adais opened her eyes, fear flickered in them. She had grown used to harsh stares and rejection, and she braced herself for more. But instead, Mama Ifeoma's voice was soft, carrying no judgment, only concern. She offered water from her gourd, and Adais drank with desperate thirst. When asked where she came from and why she was alone, Adais hesitated, her heart heavy with shame. Yet something in the older woman's eyes, steady and kind, gave her courage to speak. She shared her story in fragments, each word weighed down by sorrow, and Mama Ifeoma listened without interrupting, her expression filled with compassion. That night, for the first time in many days, Adaize slept on a mat beneath a roof. Mama Ifeoma gave her food, warm water to wash, and a corner of her small home to rest. The kindness felt almost unreal, like a dream she feared would vanish by morning. But when dawn came, Mama Ifeoma was still there, offering her a smile and a simple breakfast. She told Ades she could stay for as long as she needed, that no child of God should walk this world alone, especially not in her condition. Life under Mama Ifeoma's roof was not easy. Resources were scarce, and the older woman herself lived modestly. But what she lacked in wealth, she made up for in heart. She taught Adais how to weave mats to earn a little money, how to prepare herbal remedies from the plants growing behind the hut, and how to manage the weight of judgment with quiet dignity. Adais, in turn, poured herself into these lessons, grateful for every moment of stability. For the first time since leaving her father's compound, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. It was through Mama Ifeoma's kindness that Adaize began to rebuild herself, piece by fragile piece. Though the pain of rejection still lingered, she now had someone to remind her that even in the darkest moments, compassion could appear like a lamp in the night. And with each passing day, as her belly grew and her child moved within her, Adaize began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future could hold something more than sorrow. When the time came for Adaize to give birth, the night was heavy with rain. The winds howled through the trees as if the heavens themselves bore witness to her struggle. Inside Mama Ifeoma's small hut, Adaize clung to the mat, her cries echoing against the mud walls. It was a long and painful labor, but when dawn broke, a new life cried out with her. A baby boy whose tiny voice seemed to wash away the bitterness of her journey. She named him Chima, meaning God knows, for she believed only God knew the depth of her suffering and the purpose behind her survival. Though her heart swelled with love as she held him close, Adaize quickly realized that motherhood was not only joy, but an unending struggle. Nights blurred into days as she fed him, rocked him, and soothed his cries while her own body still ached from childbirth. There were mornings she woke weak from hunger, but still found strength to carry Chima in her arms as she wove mats to sell at the market. Each coin earned went toward food, soap, and the smallest comforts, yet it never seemed enough. Poverty clung to her like a shadow, reminding her at every turn of the life she had lost when her father turned her away. Worse still were the whispers of the villagers. As Adaize walked through the marketplace with Chima tied to her back, people's eyes followed her. Some muttered that she was foolish. Others sneered that she had ruined her future. Yet, she kept her head high, pretending not to hear, even as their words pierced her heart. For every insult she endured, she found solace in her child's innocent smile. Chima was her reminder that life could still produce beauty, even from brokenness. She often whispered promises to him as he slept, vowing that his path would not be marked by shame, that she would give him the love she had once craved from her father. Mama Ifeoma remained her anchor during those difficult months. Though the old woman had little, she shared what she could and encouraged Adaize to be strong. Children are gifts, she would often remind her, and gifts are never mistakes. Those words became Adaize's shield against despair. Slowly, through hardship, she learned that resilience was not about the absence of pain, but the courage to keep moving in spite of it. Her struggles were many, but in them, she discovered a new strength, one that came not from her father's approval, but from her determination to create a life for her son. Chima grew quickly, and with each passing month, He became the source of light that brightened Adaize's weary days. His laughter rang through Mama Ifeoma's compound like music, softening the weight of every struggle his mother endured. When he took his first steps on the earthen floor, Adaize's heart swelled with pride, for those wobbly steps felt like proof that she had done something right. Despite the hardship of raising him in poverty, he grew strong, his eyes filled with curiosity and wonder. In Chima, Adaize found more than just a son. She found purpose. The shame of her past no longer defined her, because through him, she saw a chance to rewrite her story. Whenever she felt weary, she would look at him and find new strength. His little hands tugging at her wrapper reminded her that she could not give up, that she must keep pressing forward, no matter how heavy the burden. Chima was the reason she woke early to weave mats, the reason she endured the gossiping voices in the marketplace, the reason she carried herself with dignity even when life seemed intent on breaking her spirit. Neighbors who once mocked her began to notice something different about Adaize. Though she had every reason to bow her head in defeat, she instead carried herself with quiet grace. She was no longer the frightened girl who left her father's home in tears, but a mother who had learned strength through sacrifice. People saw the bond between her and her child, the joy that radiated whenever she held him, and slowly their whispers turned from ridicule to admiration. Some even came to her for mats, not out of pity, but because they recognized the beauty of her craft and the resilience behind her smile. For Adaize, motherhood became a journey of healing. Each day, with Chima softened the wounds of her rejection and reminded her that life could grow even in the harshest soil. The child who once made her the subject of scorn was now the very reason people began to respect her again. More importantly, Chima taught her that love was not measured by status, wealth, or the approval of others, but by the sacrifices made in silence and the courage to nurture even when the world turned its back. As she watched her son grow, Adaize no longer feared the future. She dreamed of giving him an education, of seeing him walk into a classroom with confidence, of hearing him speak words that would echo far beyond the pain of her past. Chima was not just her son, he was her hope, her redemption, the living proof that the darkest nights could give birth to the brightest dawns. Back in her father's village, the days passed slowly for Chike. At first, after sending Adaize away, he carried himself with pride, convincing himself that he had done the right thing to preserve his family's honor. Among the elders, he still sat tall, speaking with confidence, but inside his compound, the silence of his daughter's absence grew louder with every passing day. The familiar sound of her laughter, the gentle way she called his name, and the sight of her moving about the yard had all vanished, leaving behind a hollowness he could not admit even to himself. When neighbors asked after her, he brushed off their questions with vague answers, claiming she had gone to live elsewhere. But the whispers began to spread. Some said he had been too harsh. Others wondered if he had considered the loneliness of his only child. At night, when he lay awake listening to the restless chirp of crickets, doubt began to creep into his heart. Pride had pushed Adaize away, but what had it brought him in return? His compound, once filled with life, now felt like a place of mourning. Chik often replayed the day of her confession in his mind. He remembered her trembling voice, her pleading eyes, her tears soaking the earth at his feet. The more he thought about it, the heavier his chest felt, until guilt settled like a stone within him. Yet, he could not bring himself to admit he had been wrong. His pride remained a wall between him and the truth, even as loneliness slowly ate at his heart. Seasons changed, and with each harvest, Chik grew older and more tired. The respect he once cherished felt empty without the joy of his daughter by his side. In gatherings, he began to notice how other fathers laughed with their grown children, how they carried grandchildren on their laps, how their homes buzzed with warmth. His own home was quiet, too quiet, and though he tried to push the memories aside, they always returned. Deep down, he knew he longed for Adaize's presence, for the child he had cast away in anger. But he did not know how to call her back, nor did he believe she would ever forgive him. The whispers of the past haunted him, reminding him of what he had lost and the wound his pride had caused. 3 years had passed since Adaize walked away from her father's compound, and in that time she had transformed. No longer the frightened girl who left in tears, she returned a woman with strength etched into her face and dignity in her stride. Chima, now a lively little boy with bright eyes, walked beside her, his small hand tucked into hers. Together, they made their way down the same dusty road she once traveled in sorrow, but this time her steps were steady, her heart no longer broken, but filled with a quiet courage. News of her return spread quickly through the village. Women paused in their cooking, men lowered their farming tools, and children ran to catch a glimpse of the young mother who had once left under a cloud of shame. Whispers rose in every corner, but the tone was different now. There was curiosity, even admiration for the strength she carried. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled, but all eyes followed her as she approached her father's gate. Chik, sitting in his compound, heard the commotion outside and came to see what stirred the village. His eyes fell on Adaize, and for a moment, he could not breathe. She looked different, stronger, calmer, yet still the daughter he had known. And beside her stood a boy whose resemblance to her was undeniable. The child's innocent gaze pierced through Chik's hardened heart, stirring emotions he had buried under years of pride. Adaize stood before the man who had cast her out, not with anger or bitterness, but with quiet resolve. She did not come to beg or to accuse, but simply to return, to show him that she had survived, that life had not broken her. Chik's neighbors watched from a distance, their whispers filling the air, but in that moment, only father and daughter existed in each other's eyes. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Chik's lips trembled, his hands shook, and memories of the day he had sent her away came flooding back with painful clarity. The daughter he thought he had lost forever now stood before him, carrying not only the strength of her own survival, but also the life of a child who looked at him with innocence untainted by the past. For the first time in years, Chik felt his pride crumble, and in its place grew a longing he could no longer deny. As the villagers gathered quietly around the compound, waiting to see what would unfold, Adaize lifted her eyes to meet her father's. Her voice was steady as she spoke, not with accusation, but with the quiet strength of someone who had endured and grown through hardship. She told Chik of the years she had spent away, of how Mama Ifeoma had taken her in when no one else would, how she had worked tirelessly to raise Chima, and how every struggle had shaped her into the woman standing before him now. Her words carried no bitterness, only truth, and that truth pierced deeper than any blade. Chik listened, his heart torn. For years, he had imagined his daughter broken, wandering aimlessly, paying for the shame she had brought upon his name. Yet here she stood, not broken, but radiant, not a symbol of disgrace, but a testament to resilience. And then came the truth that left him shaken. The boy beside her, little Chima, reached out shyly toward him. In his eyes, Chike saw not only Adaize's reflection, but also something else, an innocence that had no connection to shame or dishonor. This child, whom he had once believed would be the weight of disgrace, was instead the very reason Adaize had survived, the source of her strength and dignity. Neighbors who once whispered now nodded in silent respect, some even smiling softly at the sight of the child. They could see what Chik had been too blinded by pride to notice, that Adaize's journey had not destroyed her, it had refined her. The shocking truth was not simply that she had returned stronger, but that the very child he had feared would ruin his name had instead given his daughter purpose, resilience, and honor beyond anything his pride could have offered. The old man's hands trembled as he reached toward Chima, his voice breaking as he whispered his name. In that moment, Chike realized the depth of his mistake. The daughter he cast away had raised a child without his protection, and yet she had returned, not to curse him but to show him the life he had once rejected. The truth was both humbling and heartbreaking, and it left him struggling to hold back the tears that now burned in his eyes. The tension in the air seemed to hold the entire village still as Chik stood face to face with his daughter and grandson. For years, he had clung to pride as though it were a shield, but now that shield crumbled under the weight of love and regret. He stepped forward, his voice quivering as he spoke Adaize's name. The sternness that had once filled his words was gone, replaced with the fragile tone of a father longing for forgiveness. Adaize looked at him with tearful eyes. She had not returned for revenge, nor had she come to demand an apology. She had come because, despite everything, he was still her father. And in her silence, Chike saw the mercy she was offering him. With trembling hands, he embraced her, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to weep openly. His tears soaked her shoulder as he whispered words he had never thought he would say. "I was wrong, my daughter. Forgive me." The villagers who stood nearby witnessed a moment that spoke louder than any words. They saw a father humbled, a daughter restored, and a family pieced back together by forgiveness. Chima, unaware of the depth of the moment, laughed as his grandfather lifted him into his arms. That innocent laughter broke the heaviness in the air, turning sorrow into joy. And, for the first time in a long while, Chike's compound felt alive again. From that day forward, Chike vowed never to let pride blind him again. He welcomed Adaize and Chima into his home, not as burdens but as blessings. The shame he once feared was replaced with pride of a different kind, the kind that came not from reputation, but from love, resilience, and the grace of second chances. Though he could never erase the pain of the past, he learned that redemption is found not in denying mistakes, but in having the humility to face them and the courage to make them right. And so, the story of Adaize and Chik became a lesson for the entire village. It was a reminder that pride can destroy, but forgiveness can heal, that rejection can wound, but love has the power to restore. Above all, it showed that sometimes the very things we fear will ruin us are the ones that bring us back to life.